in their souls. But instead of seeking God for His forgiveness and His cleansing, they simply painted over the top of it with a thin coat of righteousness. And Jesus, as we go through this chapter, is going to pierce through those layers. He's going to take a scraper to it. He's going to take one of those powerful jet things, whatever they are, what are the pressure washer, and he's going to blow that stuff right off and show what they are really made of. Let's see how that also reflects on the things that we're made of. So let's begin chapter 23 in verse 1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to His disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So practice and observe what they tell you, but not what they do. For they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger." The key here is where he says in verse 2, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. And so Jesus is saying in that regard the people should follow the law of Moses. And the Apostle Paul later tells us that the law was actually designed to lead us to Christ. They were to follow the law of Moses, but not the traditions, not the garbage and the junk and the rules that the Pharisees had placed on top of the law. In fact, they had elevated the traditions to be in equal position with the law. And in fact, we know they weren't following the law of Moses, because had they would have recognized that the prophet that Moses spoke about in Deuteronomy chapter 18 had arrived on the scene. But instead, the hundreds of traditions that they wrote became just as important as God's Word. And although the Pharisees taught obedience, the Pharisees themselves did not obey God's Word. Now, it's great when you have the opportunity to make the rules and you have the authority. In that way, you can tell people to do things that you yourself are not accountable for. And the traditions that the Pharisees created actually became a way for them to control the people rather than bring them closer to God. And they became a way that they looked good on the outside, while at the same time they could be as evil as they wanted to be on the inside. See, the law was supposed to lead people to a relationship with God, but they had reduced it to focusing on following all the rules instead of following God. Now, there is that great tendency for us as well today to do that same thing. And yet at the same time, the Pharisees offered absolutely no help to the average person to be able to do this. They just said, here are all the laws, here are all the traditions, now do it. It'd be sort of like telling somebody to build a skyscraper by giving them all the materials but no instruction and no skill. Here you go. Good luck. And the real point of this, which is basically legalism, is to make the rules so that you look better, and so the other guy has no hope of looking as good as you do. And so Jesus says, listen to what they say, but don't do what they do. And when he says this, you find out that it was all about show and not about substance. It was about looking good. It was not about being good. And that's a huge, huge thing. Because the human default tendency is to look good, to make yourself appear like you're righteous and holy, and you kind of hover above the ground. And yet, on the inside, are you the same? Are you following the character of Christ? Are you thinking, speaking, and acting like Jesus would think, speak, and act? That's the key, the difference between looking good and being good. So then in verse 5 he says, they do all their deeds to be seen by others. For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. So these are kind of a list of, like Paul said, you will know them by their fruits, these false teachers. And these were some examples of the fruits that really showed what kind of people they really were. And the key to it is in verse 5, where they do all their deeds to be seen by others. And we need to question ourselves. Are we doing things right just to be seen by others as doing things right? Or are we desiring to be seen by God, who sees in the secret places? He sees not only what you say and do, He sees what you think. He sees the motivations behind your thoughts. Are we desiring to be like Him in those places? Or in those places, do we just kind of let loose and do whatever we want? So here are the examples of how the scribes and the Pharisees went about looking good by others and not to look good to God on the inside. They kept these minute rules, not because they loved God, but it's because they loved being praised by others. And so the first one that he mentions is that they make their phylacteries wide. And we run into that problem a lot, I know, today as well. And you're going, what is a phylactery? Is that like a factory that's somehow spelled differently or something? No, a phylactery actually was a leather box that was tied with a strap around the head at prayer time. Now, if you've ever been to Israel or if you've seen videos of people at the Wailing Wall, you might have seen examples of phylacteries. And they're basically a leather box, and they have a strap that goes around the head. And, it's not Karnak the Invincible or whatever. There are actually scriptures written down in that on a piece of paper that are put inside that box. And when you first look at that, you're going, what? What is this? Here's where it came from, okay? In some ways it was scriptural, but I'll get to that here in a second. It came out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Have you ever heard that before? Very, very important. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul